Okay, I'm here. I'm on. All right, here we go. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm over here. I was over listening to Raquel trying to be attentive, and I forgot I was on mute. But thank you so much for the warm welcome, Raquel. Thank you to Creative Mornings, the Creative Mornings DC team, and everybody that actually took the time to listen to a person like me and Dominic and Barrett and all the people from Creative Mornings DC. So you know, I want to kind of go back to that moment really quickly, because similar to Barrett, I hate kind of talking about myself in a way. I think that's why I like operating in like more obscure, more obscure manner than of late. But you know, I'll touch on Black with No Chaser for a quick second, just so people understand about the work that we do and how we got here. But I think also I want to touch on January 6th and what January 6th has meant for me. But then I obviously tied it into the idea of promise and all that good jazz. And so, really quickly, Black with No Chaser, y'all, we've been around for about 3 years now. In November 2017, I think Black with No Chaser was really born out of the idea that it is really this willingness and readiness to think Black and live Black unapologetically. And really, we took a piece of that from Toussaint Louverture, who was responsible for Haiti gaining its independence back in 1801, I think 1804, I believe. And so when that happened, in order to actually remain in Haiti, it wasn't really about whether or not you were Black, the hue of your skin color, right? It was more so about the way you thought, and the way you thought transferred in the state of being. And so, a lot of people asking me, is Black with No Chaser only for Black folk? No, no, this is a community where your Blackness is always safe. But understand though that if you think in Black, that means you are rooted in the idea that if we're liberating the most oppressed people ever, especially across America and the history of this country, then we're rooted in love and have a value system where if one of us are directly affected or indirectly affected, that means it affects us all, right? It goes back to what a lot of our forefathers, people like MLK and Malcolm X and Fannie Lou Hamer and Cicely Tyson, which rest in peace to her. She had an iconic career. It goes back to understanding that if one of us are hurting, we all are hurting, and understanding that piece alone is going, like, Barrett talked about it really briefly about its obligation to one another, and I'll get to that in a second. But Black with No Chaser, it really was an obligation that we stood on and a promise that we made to ourselves to always stand in the gap for our people and to be messengers, to be griots, and to control our stories and our narratives, because it was so much misinformation, disinformation, underrepresentation of our stories. And even with Black with No Chaser, it's still not enough. And so anybody listening to this and it will be listening to this, I would always say continue to create, continue to tell our stories. It's one of the most powerful things you can do. It's how mountains are moved, I believe. I've been working in policy and organizing for some time now, and I would tell you the quintessential thing to humanizing any particular issue is people telling their stories. And so that doesn't matter what side of tracks you grew up on. We're all part of this together. So yeah, that's really. And when I say we center joy in what we do, we center joy because at the end of the day, there's a lot of ills in the world, and we can sit there and talk about those ills. And I'm gonna bring up some of those things, these promises that America has made to us, and the way I've thought about it since Raquel reached out to me. And but I really want to touch on January 6th because I feel like it was a culmination of really who I am as a human being, and what I manifested in December in the promise I made to myself. I think that and me and Raquel talked about this briefly when I was on a trip. And I told her that in December I was on another trip down in North Carolina. I'm actually in North Carolina right now. My partner, she's from here. And so we spend a lot of time exploring all parts of North Carolina as part of our pastime. And we're in Asheville, North Carolina right now for some R&R. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that the this idea of of promise and what it looked like on and this how January 6th came to be, it was a manifestation in the promise that I always felt was inside of me, but I never actually said it aloud, right? I never said that, hey, I'm going to be this, I'm going to fulfill the obligation, the promise, and the honor that I made to myself. And I saw a lot in the comments when the question was asked about how have you missed out or how have you not upheld your promises to yourself. Some folks say, oh, because of me, because of fear, because of anxiety. And then so one thing that I think about when I think about promise in that regard is self-assertiveness. And I think self-assertiveness is one of those things that are kind of like admonished a bit. It seemed as if like you're being selfish, overconfident. But I think that self-assertiveness is really about owning your truths and like and living and truly owning who you are. But really quick, table that for a second because I want to get into what I think. Um, and really, this is more rhetorical questions, but and I have a list of them, right? And I think about this country and the promises that's made to people, black people, brown people, cash poor people, people that have been pushed into the margins. And I think about, man, like there's so many broken promises, right? And so when I look at it, it's like, and is promise just a mere noun? Is it a verb? Is it both? Is it an assurance? Is it a word, right? And is promise this hollow promise or a set of hollow promises that has or have been made to black people, brown people, like I said, certain immigrants, right? Cash poor folk. And also, is it 40 acres and a mule that folk that enslaved folk never received, or descendants of enslaved people? Is it a promise of education in the form of loans? Is it minimum wage at 750? Is promised mass incarceration? It's promised 1,000 people getting deported on planes in this last year, even when some of those people never even set foot in those countries they're getting deported to. Like, is it 400 black businesses during the pandemic that have been closed down while banks and large corporations receive bailouts? Is promise going to school with metal detectors and sniffing dogs and our children being indoctrinated into the prison industrial complex? Is it mass incarceration? Was it Jim Crow? Was it the failing FHA loan process? Like, is promise Flint, what we saw in Flint? Uh, like, is promise knowing that in the land of milk and honey we still have poverty and absorbing an abhorrent amount of homelessness? Like, is it like literally we just seen the other day President Biden came out and said that Harriet Tubman would now be on a $20 bill. Like, I think about all these things and these very like tokenizing things, these things that are very very empty and very hollow. Because I think what Barrett talked about is this attachment to it's an action, right? America is built upon a promise, and one of those promises is the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. And I think about that very often. I think about that very deeply about what that means for me and what that means for my community, and also what that means for people that came before me and the promises they made, right? And how we get to build upon those promises and the obligations that they set forth. And so, in a nutshell, I guess what I'm trying to say is is that for many people that look like me, that have some of the shared experiences like me, the same background as me, America kind of gave us a car, right, without the key. And when they finally gave us the key, they was like, but then we turned it on, there was no gas. And it was like, well, why haven't you got going? And I did a talk last night, and we're talking about um, outside of the Reconstruction period, which was a 10-year period after slavery ended, and we talked about this 400 plus years now, 402 or some more years about people going around and so because the I people always say, well, racism doesn't exist. No, Americans, we better. We had a black president, man. You kidding me? As a CEO of Walgreens now, she's a sister, and thinking about there's going to be an Hispanic American for the first time, leading the Department of Homeland Security, and all these different tokenizing measures that we try to line up to see whether or not America has fulfilled its promise. And like when I think about it, it's like there's something about this idea that if we say it long enough, it'll come to fruition. And I think that part of what promise really is really just steeped in love. And on the way down here, um, like I was listening to a book by Bell Hooks, and some people may know who Bell Hooks is. I think she's a literary genius. She's a very unflinching, unapologetic sister who I believe that hits at the core of everything that we need to be and we should strive to be. She's somebody that really displaces greed and this idea of you know like if we can push aside all of our fleshly type of things we commit ourselves to, and kind of center love in our lives, love and joy, in a way that we put aside power and greed and domination, that we can build better truths for ourselves, better promises for ourselves, better promises towards our communities, and align ourselves with our ancestors who came before us. And when I see it, right, and when I try to understand what Bell Hooks was saying, is that, look, on January 6th, I want to bring it back to that moment on January 6th. Like I said, was a culmination of all those things happening at one particular time. It was an aggregate of all the time that I put into this process, into figuring out what it means to be an American, what it means to fulfill my promise to myself, to my community, and to folks that came before me. And so when people say, "Hey, man," they ask me, like, how does it feel? Well, it's something that I do every single day. It's something that we wake up, and I wake up in terms of whether it be a job for Black with No Chaser, or organizing an event, or anything I did in the past. It was built upon a foundation of love. And I think that when I think about the word promise, it's also truth, and it's the willingness to live boldly and righteously in your truths. And I think that promise takes work. It takes us building on, like, legacies, and building on promises. And like, as I sit here and I talk to y'all, and I think about this idea of what it means to, like, have promise, is one thing that I wish that, in terms of, and I'm sorry, because I was like, should I be like policy driven? Should I talk about promise in a way in which, like, there's this verbal exchange between one another? Is it just, hey, I said I'm a promise to do this? But I think that, like, for me, like, I'll be remiss if I didn't say that I want to live in a place where sisters like Horsford that mysteriously died in their home can receive justice. To me, promise is justice. Promise is truth. Promise is living out a value system that stands the test of time. And to be honest with y'all, like, without love, and I know that it's integrity. Somebody just said it's integrity. I think everything that's good, right? I think it's promise. Barrett pointed out that he said that very few people make bad promises that are steeped in, like, malicious type of, like a thought process. Very few people say, "I'm a promise to go out and do harm to people." And I think that, like, and so when you think about the word promise, again, it circles back to this idea about self-assertiveness. And I wrote this down because Bell Hooks put it in her book. She said self-assertiveness is the willingness to stand up for myself or yourself, to be who I am openly, to treat myself with respect in all human encounters. And I think that, like, when I look back to January 6th, on how we even got here, is I look at a lot of people that just didn't really have respect in all human encounters. There's no way that you can fulfill a promise and love yourself, and knowing that in terms of how you view community as a way in which I inflict harm and violence upon one another, and then in return I receive something from that, which is in the form of privilege and entitlement and things that, and greed and domination over people and communities that really just want to live a bit more freely and breathe a bit more freely. And so, that's why I made a promise, to myself, to ourselves, to love ourselves, and in return, directly align those promises with what we made to our community and the ones that came forward. So, you know, I think that all in all, if I can leave y'all with anything, it would be is that, in the good words of Cicely Tyson, and I take her words very seriously, is the moment anyone tries to demean, debase, or degrade you in any way, you have to know how good and how great you are. Like nobody would bother to beat you down if you were not a threat. And the promise to all people out there struggling with the fact that where they should find themselves in like living in this place in the land of milk and honey. I think that it's about it's about realizing that you have worth and that you have value, and that knowing that truth and not living in anxiety and living in fear and living in unassertiveness is when you actually, I think there's a certain thing, like, you know, people always say that if you got to take care of your home first before you can take care of others. And I think a lot of times we're not seeing the change we want to see around us because initially we haven't really fulfilled our promises to ourselves, the obligation, the duty that we have to ourselves. And so once we do that, we can take care of our communities. And so yeah, look, I think I'll end by saying this is, I ask everyone out there today, anybody who's watching this, is first and foremost, like, live out your truth. I think living out your truth and continue to tell your story is the single most important thing that you can do in your lifetime. And when you do that, other people can see light in that, and then they too can find value and find power and be empowered by those words. And so never shy away from your promise and what was and what's for you. And then from that, communities will rise up and will be better from it. And so, with that being said, I just want to thank, community Creative Mornings DC and the whole team for inviting me out. Hopefully there was something that I said that resonated with someone out there. But as somebody that is not I wouldn't call myself a motivational speaker. I do appreciate the opportunity to come on here and share some of my experiences, because I didn't really want to make it about January 6th because it was a horrible moment in this nation's history. People died, and sometimes I try not to relish in those moments, but here we are, and I think that that's part of our truth, but that doesn't have to be our end all be all. And so let's keep on pushing, keep on living our truth, keeping on loving one another, keep on upholding our promises to one another. And because part of that promise is just being good, decent human beings. It's literally upholding a certain level of ethics, this love ethic that bell hooks talk about, that we have to um, um, you know have amongst one another. And I think that when we have that love ethic at the core of who we are, eventually communities and the country we love so much ends up being like a better place to live, not just for some but for everyone. So appreciate y'all.